Good morning, everybody. Good morning. How are you all doing? We are kicking these plenaries out, aren't we? We are kicking them out. I'm getting signs that folks can't hear me. Can you all hear me okay? Is this getting better? Getting better? Check, check, microphone check. Yeah? All right. We're going to have a conversation this morning that is critically important. There's a lot of discussion about risk in the field of philanthropy in this moment, particularly in this political moment in this country. What is at risk? What's at risk to lose? So we're going to have a conversation about that this morning. So we are all aware of increased attacks and investigations against our sector and the work that we all care about. And we know, colleagues, that the goal of these attacks are to instill fear and to paralyze our work. In this moment, we have to make hard decisions, communicate with conviction, and move into action. We must remember that we have a mandate from our people in our communities to do this work. And I believe, and I think there's agreement, that the backlash that we're seeing is because, one, shifting demographics in this country, and two, because we have been making real inroads on work around equity and justice for all people. Over the past few months, we have seen some members of the philanthropic community beginning to move from paralysis to action. We've seen foundations increasing funding and getting it out faster, becoming more vocal in advocating for what we value. And there's also increased collaboration amongst foundations on strategy. One of those sector-wide efforts is the Racial Equity Advancement and Defense Initiative, which is a partnership between ABFI, APIP, and NAP to protect and advance explicit grant-making. But READY is just one example. And through this initiative, we have been working to have more honest conversations about risk in the sector and what managing risk really, really means. It is no longer enough, colleagues, to just do great work. We must also navigate a shifting landscape that could impact our funding, programming, and organizational capacity. And staying ahead of these risks and boldly defending our values is necessary to face current challenges and those still to come. But what if the greatest risk, colleagues, what if the greatest risk is actually the risk of inaction and all that we stand to lose? So today, we want to have a conversation about how we move from risk aversion to risk appetite in this sector, understanding where risk is tolerable and manageable and how to move through it. So with that, I want you all to help welcome, I should say, our panelists for this morning, and I'm going to bring them up. Angela Maldonado, partner with Bridgespan. Robert Rabin, president and founder of the Rabin Group. Darielle Rodriguez, acting co-chief counsel, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, and Miguel Santana, president and CEO, California Community Foundation. You all help me welcome our colleagues to the stage. All. Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning.
I was going to start with a fun question about what is your zodiac sign, but Robert, you got me thinking about something else now.
Scorpio.
So I was Scorpio. I'm curious.
Same.
Scorpio.
Virgo.
Virgo, Scorpio.
Cancer.
Leo. Okay. All right. That was our technical introduction of the panel. I just want you all to know that. So we are here to talk about risk and risk appetite in this moment, and I really do want to just start off, and let me just say, the folks on this stage have my absolute respect. They are working hard every day, and so I am really honored to be in this conversation with all of you. In terms of risk and risk appetite in the philanthropic sector, just a couple of words from each of you to get us going about how you view it. Just one or two words in terms of risk appetite in this sector in this moment, and then we'll jump into more questions. So I'm going to start with you, Angela, and we can just go on down the row. Yeah.
The two words that come to mind for myself are fearful regression.
Fearful
Regression.
regression.
All right, Robert.
Such a diverse sector. It's everything from no appetite at all to Dolores Huerta.
Yes, yes. Darielle.
I would say cautious trepidation.
Cautious, trepidation. Miguel.
Still cautious.
Still cautious. Thank you for that. Just wanted to take a temperature, and I think what all of you are suggesting, even with a diverse environment, as you say, Robert, there's work to do around moving in terms of risk tolerance. So we also talk within the Ready Initiative about acting with conviction in this moment. And so another sort of open question to all of you. Robert, I'll start with you first. What does that mean to you when you hear acting with conviction, particularly in this climate? What does it mean to you personally? And then also, what does it mean to bring that to your work?
A couple things, and thank you, Hip, and Nat, for putting this together, and Susan, for your extraordinary leadership at AbbVie and sort of how different the profession is because of your work. God bless you. I start with, we staff a lot of foundations and NGOs, and I start with authenticity, which is the importance in turbulent times of the leadership of organizations being as honest as possible with themselves, their staff, their grantees, of exactly where they are. There actually isn't a right or wrong. We can have activists who are willing to sort of respond to unconventional wisdom and be unconventional, and we can have mainstream players who want to sort of stay the course. And I think what the man really likes is for us to fight among each other about who has moral supremacy on that question.
Yes.
I'm much more interested in decide as a board of a foundation or NGO where you are. Are you Fannie Lou Hamer or not? And be clear about that and then carry forward. That's crucial. And it's a group therapeutic question more than anything.
I love your description of the man. Thank you for that. Darielle, how about you?
Well, personally, I come from a mom who left Puerto Rico by herself at the age of 25 to come to Boston to be a limited English proficient teacher. So she always taught my sister and me to lead with courage and to be fearless in everything that we do. And she is an Afro-Latina, and she taught me about the reality of racism in our country and in Puerto Rico. And so that is what moves me every single day to do this work, to do it with honesty, right? Especially in this moment when we are being gaslit to believe that racism is a thing of the past, and to lead with conviction and consistency. And what consistency means for me is to ensure that the work that I'm doing every single day is aligned with the mission of my organization, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Our mission is to advance voice, opportunity, and power for Black communities and communities of color. And that means advancing opportunities for the communities that we serve, even when it's not popular, like it is not today, right? And so that means not backing away from ensuring that we have a strong multiracial democracy. That means taking care of myself so that I can be consistent for my colleagues and our clients. So that's what it looks like for me to lead with conviction.
Thank you for that. Miguel, acting with conviction, both personally and how you bring it into your work. Yeah.
Soy hijo de emigrantes. My parents arrived in the late 60s. They were undocumented for my entire childhood. They legalized their status through amnesty. And so for me, it's obviously personal. When I see children being abandoned, terrified, parents not sending their kids to school, patients deciding to miss their chemo treatment because they're afraid, workers terrified that this would be the last time they'll see their family. Those are all the fears that I experienced as a child. So this is deeply personal. I run the California Community Foundation based in Los Angeles. We are at the center of the storm today, and we're fighting back. I am so proud to be an Angelino.
You know, I just want to, Miguel, as you go on about conviction, can we personally, you all, support this brother? Your leadership in this moment is absolutely critical, and you are modeling for everyone about how to lead with conviction. So I want to personally and publicly thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Well, in Los Angeles, we have a strong tradition of supporting the community's voice to push back against injustice. We have a robust infrastructure of immigrant justice organizations, of intergroup organizations, and we have a mayor who started one, the Community Coalition. I spoke to her last night, and for her, it is personal too. And she is fighting not only for our city, but she's fighting for our community and her own family. And so fighting with conviction means that you're fighting as if your life depends on it, because it actually does. And so for philanthropy, it means getting out of the ivory tower, using your own voice, and not just funding, but standing by in support of our organizations when it most matters.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we're going to talk more about that. Angela, let me turn to you in terms of conviction. What does it mean for you?
It's been acknowledged at this conference now several times, but I think it is important to acknowledge again just the reality that we all have been living in a very panicked state for quite some time, and not just under this administration, the first administration, the pandemic, the erosion of human rights that we are watching happen right now, and what we are watching in the news daily, and particularly more recently as we watch immigrant communities be dehumanized in ways that are dangerous to the work ahead. And I name that because I think it's incredibly important to stay grounded in the reality of the communities that we are talking about and that are at the center of this work. So I really appreciate your point, Miguel, about like this work is not abstract. This work is actually like very real. And the work of philanthropy has such big implications from a funding perspective and a narrative perspective on whether communities will make it through this moment or not. And so for me, conviction right now means really living into discipline every day in terms of the complexity of what this work is and what the solutions will be to get to the other side. I think we have struggled for a long time in philanthropy with holding complexity side by side. We want programs that solve the solution of systemic racism, and that is not going to be the solution. We need programming, we need amazing programming to continue to meet the needs daily of the communities that are in need, and we need to be doing narrative change work. We need to be thinking about longer term momentum building. We need to be thinking about this work beyond this administration and decades out. This needs to be a multi-decade effort, and that requires multi-decade commitment to sustain it. And so for me in this work, as somebody who sits kind of at the nexus of philanthropy and nonprofits, it is continuing to bring that perspective and elevate this duality that needs to be true to get to the other side and stay really disciplined in that.
Yeah, I appreciate the word discipline. I was sharing at dinner last night with some girlfriends, Angela Glover Blackwell, who I love dearly. We were talking about hope, and she said, you know, Susan, hope is a discipline. And when she said it, it just hit me so hard, right? Hope is a discipline, right? And Angela, when you talk about multi-generational sort of impact, it raises a question again, a conversation I was in last night about why aren't we endowing nonprofit organizations? Why aren't we thinking very differently about how to resource movements and the like? But I digress. Let me come to you, Darielle. When this issue of risk, what comes to mind for most folks is legal risk. We know that there are different kinds of risk, but I think what has been a real issue in the field over the last 2 years or even more is this issue of legal risk. So What If a Foundation, Darielle, wants to support race-explicit grant making, wants to support racial equity and be vocal about their work, but they're worried about legal exposure and political backlash. what steps can funders take now to ensure that their actions are both courageous, acting with conviction, and compliant in today's climate?
It's a great question, and one that I've been thinking a lot about over the last couple of years since the ruling in the Supreme Court case, UNC and Harvard versus, or SFFA versus UNC and Harvard, because that is when we started to see an uptick in the lawsuits that were being brought to challenge racial equity programs in a variety of sectors. And one thing that I've learned, quite frankly, by working with you, Susan, and by engaging the philanthropic sector, is that one way is to lean into trust-based philanthropy. And I didn't know what that meant, right? I'm a civil rights attorney, and philanthropy is not my area of expertise. But as I met with more and more philanthropic leaders, I started hearing this term more. And what I came to understand is that basically it means investing in organizations in ways that are more akin to gifts as opposed to grants with a lot of strings attached. And the value of that sort of investment demonstrates that you trust that organization to take that investment and do with it what they need to do, right? That sort of funding model is transformational. And I speak from a personal experience, my professional experience as a nonprofit leader. That sort of investment is transformational because it's not constricted to one line of work. It's funding that you can use across your different lines of work, and it really makes a difference in terms of the security and stability that an organization has. The other thing that I'll say is, after the Harvard ruling came down, we quickly realized that outreach and education, that impact litigation, those things weren't enough. That nonprofits with a racial equity focus, they needed advice and counsel on their programs, right? But they needed advice and counsel from trusted partners, from organizations and attorneys that understood the importance of advancing racial equity. We know that in the days after the SFFA ruling, a lot of attorneys started giving out advice, but that advice was very, very risk averse, right? It was not designed to strengthen racial equity programs. It was designed to make them go away so that organizations had no potential risk for liability. And that, going back to the question of how do you lead with conviction, that approach is not aligned with the Lawyers Committee's mission. It just isn't. So we stood up a pro bono initiative called the Protecting and Advancing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, and that is still the name. We're not changing it. And through that initiative, we have served many nonprofits on their racial equity programs to ensure that not only are they compliant with the law, but that they can continue, that they can be stronger than before, and that they can continue having impact. So this is one way that philanthropic organizations can help ensure that their grantees are getting the advice that they need, right? By ensuring that they are consulting with civil rights attorneys who have expertise on these issues to ensure that they are able to continue doing this work in very bold ways to serve the communities that they serve across the country.
No, thank you. Darielle, how do folks learn more about this program, the Protecting DEI Pro Bono Initiative, for folks that need to make referrals for grantees?
Sure. You can go to our website, lawyerscommittee.org, and there you will find more information.
Yeah, great. You said something else. Robert, are you an attorney? You're an attorney. Yeah, that's what I thought. You said something else just about guilty. You said something else, Darielle, about civil rights attorneys. I raised a question the other day about whether we as a field, colleagues, need to be thinking around pipelines of lawyers to work with philanthropy, right? To take these positions as general counsels in foundations with a civil rights analysis and lens to get more civil rights attorneys on foundation boards. I think all that is strategy that we could be thinking about more intentionally, right? So Robert, let me come to you next. You've been philanthropy adjacent and supportive for a long time. We've both been in this sector for quite some time, and we have made progress. Want to see more, but we've made progress moving racial equity grant making, race explicit grant making in the field. And we are seeing some rollback. We're actually seeing some rollback now. What advice, Robert, do you have for funders who want to use bold movement-aligned messaging but are concerned about risk?
I'll say a couple things, and they're big things, but I'll say them super quick. One, and Angela, I'm sort of building on what you said, it has been panic for 10 years, really, really bad. For huge swaths of the country, it has always been this. Yeah. And so I find it helpful. That's not sort of, although I look dour, I don't mean that dour. I mean that hopeful, and I won't list all of them, but if you're sort of African American in Mississippi, Louisiana, if you're certain tribes, many of our states, you have only in American history known this. Mm-hmm. You have known rulers who are willing to keep you down by convincing a demographic majority that all of their ills are because of you.
Yes, right. Yeah.
It feels a little more chaotic now, but this has always been the case. And I raise that to say, and it is women and people of color who show you the way out. Mm-hmm. It is overwhelmingly women and people of color who come up with the strategies and the tactics, whether it's civil disobedience or prayer or all the things, wedging, we could go through all strategies and tactics. So that will happen again, and it will happen at the national level. Mm-hmm. So that's one. Two, with respect to philanthropy, it's extremely diverse, thousands and thousands of actors. It's sort of weird to generalize. That said, I will now be weird. I want and am seeing many of our leaders in philanthropy to develop thicker skin. Mm-hmm. We have sort of a crew of people who go to Montgomery and weep over the graves of the martyrs, but are petrified of a stiff letter from Congress.
Wow.
And I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is just people just need to be honest.
Yeah.
If it's about self-preservation, that's fine. It's your money. You're entitled to do that.
Sort of your money, but yeah. Okay.
If it's about activism, well, for family foundations, it's your money.
You're right.
And they're much bigger. And if you're a plutocrat, it's your money. Mm. I'm respectful of that. What I am seeing, and I praise God, and I praise some really courageous leaders. Mm-hmm. Tanya Allen at McKnight, John Palfrey at MacArthur, Deepak Bhargava at Freedom Together, and now lots and lots, Richard Besser at Robert Wood Johnson. Yes. And of course, when I mention them, I mean their staffs. Mm-hmm.
Some of you are probably out here. Yeah.
Yes. Who are absolutely doing the thing. They are not admiring the problem. They have gathered together to say, okay, come on, people. Look what happened with the law firms. Mm-hmm. Look what happened with corporate America when they abandoned DEI because they were government contractors. Look what happened with universities. We can do better. And we've got the benefit of now of sort of data about how those different sectors responded. So what you're seeing in sort of larger philanthropy, which is always mindful of smaller institutions, I find, is increasing coalescence and coherence, and increasing honesty about we can do this, we probably can't do that, who can do that, whom do we fund that can say the thing that we don't want to say. I'm being sort of diplomatic. I am increasingly optimistic that some really terrific leaders have begun to lead in ways that I don't think the sector has seen. And then and I'll stop with, it's leaders like Miguel and Brenda at California Endowment and Adriana at Chicago Community Trust, and they'll be upset that I called them out. They actually push their peers to do the thing. And what you need to do is give them the support so they can continue to push their peers to be there on the hard stuff.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm watching it in real time, Miguel, so that was a great segue. I'm coming to you. Watching it in real time, again, how you are standing up. And we know that organizations, as you say, right in your region, right in your backyard, is like ground zero, under attack. How do you see philanthropy's role in supporting organizations on the front line? What advice do you give to colleagues?
So I don't think we have a choice. We are at now, whether we accept that role or not, we're at the front line of protecting democracy.
Yes.
We are in the battlefield. And hiding or pretending to be invisible,
Yeah.
not going to work. You're still going to be under attack.
Yeah.
And as my friend here explained, as we're seeing others go through the process, that hiding doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I would say beyond that, we have a duty. It is in our mission to stand up for democracy when it most matters, and to stand with our partners. So on the day that my friend for 30 years, Angelica Salas, received the letter from the Senate Judiciary, Frankie Miranda, who's here, and I stood right next to her that morning. And we made it very clear that we're not only standing with her, we're standing in front of her, and we're willing to take the bullets for her.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why we exist.
Yes.
We don't exist for ourselves. This is not our money. This is the community's money. And so when it most matters is when we need to show up. And so in Los Angeles, we're very fortunate in that philanthropy in LA is pretty tight. We coordinate in a variety of different ways, and during crisis in particular. And so one thing, during the wildfires, we stood up a fund and raised $100 million to support the most vulnerable victims of that wildfire. And
Yes. Yes.
and now we have a different kind of wildfire. Some of the very same people who were impacted in Altadena and the workers in Palisades are now being impacted again. And so yesterday in Los Angeles, the U.S. Attorney announced publicly in a press conference that he is going after not only the community-based organizations that support immigrants, but he's going after their funders. His office is down the street from mine. And so today we announced we're establishing another fund to protect, that's right, to protect those families who are terrified to go outside,
Yes.
who lost the only income that they received. And we're asking not just philanthropy, we're asking everybody, all Angelenos, just like we did in the wildfire, to come together to support each other.
Yes.
It's a simple name that really describes what it is. It's Los Angeles neighbors supporting neighbors.
And we should all be writing that down, y'all. We should all be writing that down. Yes.
You know, Angelinos come together when it most matters.
Yeah.
And it's part of our ethos, part of our culture as a community. And so philanthropy has a lot to learn from that.
Yes.
And I agree, we're getting there. We're getting there. We were successful in pushing back the excise tax, but that was to protect ourselves.
Right.
Let's be clear.
Yes, right. That's
Okay,
right.
we need to focus and use that same energy to protect our community.
Yes. You know, there are so many things that you said, Miguel, that to me makes me believe that we need to be rewriting the meaning of philanthropy in this moment. You said not only are you standing next to your partners, you're standing in front of them. And I just would like us to sort of reflect on that, colleagues, about how we define philanthropy in this moment. It's got to be different. It's got to be different, and it's got to change. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Angela, let me ask, Bridgespan has done a lot of work to support foundations in moving sort of equity-centered, justice-centered strategies. What are the ongoing and even maybe newer internal barriers that you see inside foundations to move agenda on these issues that we care about? Race explicit, explicit about immigrant rights, explicit about queer, lesbian rights. I mean, what are the barriers that you see, and how can they be addressed in this moment?
I'll start with first, I think it's been really interesting just to see how we even talk about risk right now in this moment, to your point about this is a moment to really redefine what the role of philanthropy is. I think we are, when I think about what risk is being uncertain about what your outcomes will be. And you can think about that in many different ways. It's the legal risk. We don't know the outcomes that exist there. It is the financial risk. It is the reputational risk of that. And on the other side of that is really talking about loss of money, loss of power, loss of relationships or control. But the tension for me in the conversation has been that entire definition around what risk is centers philanthropy. And it centers protecting the status quo for institutions rather than really thinking about risk from the perspective of community. What is the risk to community at this moment in time? And then what does that mean about the role of philanthropy in showing up right now to ensure that they can not just get through this moment, but survive it and get to the other side. So that has been one of the biggest barriers, is we're starting with this notion of how do we preserve ourselves? How do we maintain who we are and the power that we hold today first? So that's been a challenge. I think the ways in which we have been working with organizations to have that conversation is first, you have to talk to your boards about this in really explicit and direct ways. And we cannot let that skill set of talking about race and equity-based grant making atrophy in this moment because we don't want to say the word.
Thank you. Yes.
It sounds simple, but people are not talking to their boards about the ways in which they are pivoting their approaches. They are just removing language, and the language matters. So that's the first thing. The second is, lots of organizations right now, nonprofits are doing it. I heard so many organizations talking about the ways in which they have taken a beat and they've engaged in scenario planning. What are all the things that could happen? What are all the worst case scenarios? What is our plan for when those things happen, if they happen? I think about, scenario planning not as risk aversion. There has always been risk in the work that we do. It is risk mitigation. You are just prepared for it to happen. And that is then the way in which you can engage your board around, here's our strategy, here's our plan, here's what we are doing. We're not just going off and, acting on a whim. We've thought about this intentionally. And then lastly, the thing I'll say, and I think this has been a challenge actually before this moment, I think it's now been exacerbated in this moment, is that I think we talk about race-based grant making almost as if it means race exclusive. And it doesn't. If you are using data to anchor your approach to grant making, then the data is telling you what to do. If the data is showing you that there are inequities that exist for the communities that you serve, and those communities are largely Black, Latino, Indigenous, communities of color, then you need to be talking about the solution such that the data will change on the other side of that. And so seeing organizations right now pull back from disaggregating their data is a real challenge because it is going to hide the conversation that needs to be had around how you design solutions to solve for systemic inequities.
Yes. No, we've been sort of shouting that as loud as we can. Don't stop using data, collecting data, disaggregating data by race, again, because of the fear of doing so. We need that information actually to make the case.
Which is why they want to stop you from collecting data.
Absolutely. So we have to know how to play the game, so to speak. But you mentioned boards. I wanted to ask all of you just about your thoughts about how do we increase the risk appetite of boards of trustees of foundations, because at the end of the day, they matter tremendously in this moment. We do a lot of work at APFI, and my colleagues at HIP and NAP and APIP are starting as well to do more trustee organizing. What are some thoughts, Miguel, what has worked for you? What are some thoughts that come to mind for each of you about how to increase the risk appetites of boards?
So this point is so important.
Yes.
Because who's on your board in moments like this really matters.
Yeah.
I have the great fortune to have Tom Saenz as my chair.
Yes.
Tom Saenz, the head of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund.
Yes.
And so for him, this is his life's work.
Yes.
and he understands very clearly our role and the importance. And so I have a board chair who's pushing me to do more.
Yes, yes.
And a board as a whole who are not all civil rights attorneys, largely in the investment profession, but who understand the mission of the foundation and its purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I know not everyone has this. When I share this with my colleagues, they always say, I wish I had Tom as my chair. But part of our responsibility is to ensure that we have Toms on our board.
Yeah, that's right.
Members of the community who look like the community, but as important, who represent the values and the interest and the aspirations of the community. Mm-hmm. Because at moments like this is when it most matters.
Yes.
To identify risk in the context of the risk of doing nothing.
Yes, yeah, right, risk of inaction. Other thoughts about how to build and grow risk appetite of boards?
Yeah, 3 quick thoughts, all of which have a grain of unpopularity to them. Mm-hmm. Every organization is different, obviously. We can't rely on the people of color on the board to sort of make this happen. They can be the conscience of a board, but they can't. This is about power. And so assiduously cultivating white allies who are sort of mostly with you, get out there and be really with you and do it. It's very, very effective. 1. 2, don't crack your head if one particular institution, unless you work there, God bless you, isn't sort of where you want them to be. There's exponentially more money. If it's about resourcing our communities, there's exponentially more money among high net worth individuals within a 3-mile radius of the headquarters of any foundation in this country than there is at any foundation. Mm-hmm. The wealthiest Latina in the country is Barbara Dalio, Ray and Barbara Dalio, estimated $16 billion. Most of us never sort of think about her. So, and I could go on and on and on and on. There's an enormous amount of money we don't even think about, and it's philanthropy. And then 3, I think it's a wake-up call, and every hammer here's a nail. I'm a lobbyist. Every hammer hits a nail. Philanthropy has to be involved in advocacy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're going to be regulated or bullied to death. And if it's not this administration, it'll be another one. And if it's not at the federal level, it'll be at the state level. The notion that you're sort of autonomous or hands-off is untrue. And so you have to have an investment in robust advocacy, and by that I don't just mean lobbying or PAC donations to members. I mean the much harder work of grassroots advocacy and engaging and supporting people so that they're talking to regulators and elected officials about why the sector matters.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. You mentioned donors, Robert. I actually just want to co-sign on that. We know that individuals give out more money than foundations do every year, right? It's just not organized. And so an ask, sort of a encouragement to foundations to think about how to support donor organizing in this moment. So yeah, we'll do the work, continued work to try to grow the risk appetite of foundations, but there's real money out there. And I think the philanthropic sector, I know a number of foundations have started to support organizations to organize donors, individual donors in this moment. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. I appreciate that. We're going to go to questions in a few seconds. But let me see if I can, again, more practical sort of guidance from any of you. Can someone share a moment when risk aversion almost paralyzed your work, and what helped you manage that risk towards action? Any practical sort of stories and examples? Darielle.
I guess I'll just share that when we first started our pro bono initiative, the way that we do our work is that we co-counsel with private law firms to provide advice and counsel to our clients. We are a nonprofit organization. We probably have about 70 employees. There's no way that we could serve nonprofits across the country without the support of our pro bono co-counsel firms. Our pro bono co-counsel firms, many of them advise corporate clients that are driven by profit. That is very different than what drives a nonprofit, right? We are mission driven. And so when we first started our pro bono initiative, we realized that the inclination of some of our co-counsel firms was to be risk averse. And because we were in a co-counsel model, we quickly picked up on that, and we realized that in addition to providing advice and counsel to our clients, we had another goal here that we had to quickly flesh out, and that was creating a community of practice so that we could train other pro bono attorneys on our orientation to providing advice and counsel to mission-driven racial justice organizations, right? And now, 2 years into the initiative, I will say that that has had results. We've done trainings, we've developed template memos, we have many conversations with our co-counsel attorneys on our orientation and why we adopt this orientation to advance racial justice work, and it has had an impact. And going back to the question that you previously asked, I think a lot of it too, in terms of increasing appetite for risk, is who is advising you? Who are your attorneys? What law firm is advising you? And are they aligned with your goals?
Yeah.
Do they understand that you are hiring them to help you accomplish your goals? Or are they simply just trying to eliminate all risk, regardless of what your risk appetite is, right? And so through this initiative, we have spoken to countless boards to give them honest advice about the legal landscape. And when you talk about risk, there are different buckets of risk. There's litigation risk, right? Just the risk of you getting sued, which is very different than liability risk. If you do get sued, what is the chance that you will ultimately prevail in that lawsuit? And then there's reputational risk, right? And reputational risk, that is something, you know, for crisis management firms, that's not us. That's not lawyers that can really advise on the reputational risk perspective. But I think it's important to sort of disaggregate the different types of risk and really think carefully about who is advising you on these very tough questions to ensure that you're getting the results that quite frankly, you're paying for.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to you on that if I can. Any other responses to that general question about a time or sort of an example when risk aversion almost paralyzed your work, and then you were able to move beyond it to action? Any?
You know, when the outcome of the election surfaced, like every foundation, most organizations, it was a moment of pause. It was a moment to really fully appreciate what was coming. And so part of what I feel very strongly is that I could talk tough, but this is not just my personal risk. There is a personal risk to Miguel Santana, but I represent an organization that's been around for 110 years. I have, 90 staff members. I have a board who are fiduciaries, and I have a family. And so part of it is thinking through every one of those members who are in the risk with you and responding by identifying what is coming and how are we preparing for it. So in the December board meeting, I laid out 3 scenarios for the board. What are we going to do if they go after us? What are we going to do if they go after one of our colleagues? And what are we going to do if they go after one of our grantees? And we had an honest conversation about that. We had it once, and it was done. We understood clearly what we're going to do strategically to protect the organization. We understood that with our colleagues, an attack on one is attack on all, and we were going to stand in front of our grantees when it most matters.
Yes.
So that conversation was in December. And so, and being transparent with the CCF staff and saying, we are preparing for what may happen. We have to get our financials in 100% order.
That's right.
We can't leave anything to chance. We have to cross our T's and dot our I's. We have to be intentional about our work and who we trust and move forward.
Yes.
And so I think, risk is layered, right? It's not just static, and it evolves. But it's important to bring your community, your stakeholders along as you're being very strategic about how you're managing those risks.
Yes.
So that when the moment does come, as we're confronting today, you've built the reserves of capital, of trust, and most importantly, of clarity about what you're supposed to be doing at these times.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. I think I'm going to ask for a little bit of instruction. I believe we have a question on the app, and I'm looking through the curtains to see if we can take it. Nope, they said, nope, you can't. Okay, so in a wrap, let me just ask you all just one final question. There's so much more. I could just go on, but we don't have time. If you could see one action or response to the current moment take hold across the philanthropic sector today, what would you want to see? And that'll be closing comments for each of you as we wrap this discussion. I'll start with you, sister. Yeah.
Miguel, you mentioned this earlier, but I think one of the things right now that I would love to see philanthropic institutions do more of is really use their voice in this moment. This is yes, funding matters. Move more money more quickly with urgency to grantees. And there is a seat of privilege that philanthropic institutions sit in. I include Bridgespan in that seat of privilege alongside those organizations around using your voice as a moment to actually move the field forward, not just hold the line on where we're at, because some would argue holding the line is actually progress. I fall a little bit on the other side of it in terms of that is insufficient if we just hold the line. This is actually an opportunity to think about how does philanthropy step up in other ways around using their voice, funding organizations who have a voice and a perspective that need to be elevated, that are doing the long haul work of narrative change, movement building. I would love to see philanthropy do that. And then I would just say this is a moment to fund with more urgency. Think about the organizations in your portfolio, the 10 to 15, that need to get through this and get to the other side. And those are the organizations that now is the time to use your endowment to back them, to think about how are you setting them up, potentially with endowment grant making, so that they are sustained in the long haul beyond a grant cycle.
Okay, great. Smaller comments, because I'm getting all sorts of Robert, Darielle, and Miguel, we're going to end with you.
Race-based funding. The great news is we are seeing it. We are seeing organized philanthropy being more organized and allowing people to do things. I think the one thing I'd love to see is a much deeper dive with people of faith. It's a profoundly religious nation. The sector is overwhelmingly secular. I think it is either immoral or malpractice to not have peer relationships with a huge swath of people of faith. A, it's the right thing to do. B, I think it's political and advocacy and messaging winner.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, Darielle.
Susan has heard me say this before. Maybe I learned it from you, but do not do our opposition's work for them, right? Do not engage in proactive compliance. That is their goal. Their goal is to instill fear with threats, and there have been probably close to 300 lawsuits filed against this administration, many of which have been successful. They lead with illegality. I mean, so much of what they do is on its face unlawful. So do not succumb to fear and do not proactively comply, because it really, really harms your grantees, and do not increase the barriers and hurdles for grantees doing racial justice work to receive funding.
Miguel, and last word.
So we get invited to rooms that many of our grantees do not. In front of business, in front of faith leaders, in front of government elected officials, in front of other very wealthy donors. And when we're being invited, they're not inviting you, Miguel Santana. They're inviting the CEO of the California Community Foundation. And that role, regardless of who it is, has a responsibility to speak up in those rooms about what's going on, and to bridge and to invite those sectors into what we're doing. Whether it's, I was asked to be the keynote at the chamber, and I spoke about immigration and why they should care and why they should be joining us. The same with other sectors. And so don't get fooled that you're being invited. It's not about you.
Yes.
It's
yes.
about the job that you have. You have a job to speak up, to invite others, and create the on-ramps where a bigger coalition could be part of this work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Colleagues, I hope you're walking away from this conversation just with more honest reflection about risk. We are also hearing the word solidarity a lot in this moment. I think an act of solidarity is all of us giving to this fund that Miguel is standing up, both personally and professionally, if we can do it. You all help me thank the panelists, and thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
This concludes our morning sessions. To prepare for today's Corazon Awards luncheon, please exit the ballroom now so we can begin our lunch setup. We'll see you back here at 12 p.m. Thank you.